yeah, I came to Hull for uni and then never left, fell in love with the city. And it's just an incredible city. And it's just a real privilege to be able to represent the ward in which I live in, and be able to talk about politics like all the time, because that's great, isn't it? So anyway, so I'm really pleased to be talking about natives today. I think it's a really fantastic book, and I think it's just it's just like the way that Akala like sort of talks about race in a really eloquent way. And I think whenever you sort of hear him speak about race and class, it's just so connected, and it just manages to keep everything so calm, doesn't he? And make sure that his views are articulated properly, and heard by racists as well. So and also just makes them look really stupid sometimes as well, doesn't he, with like Tommy Robinson and that question time sort of stuff. So just in terms of why I picked it was so I got given it for a birthday present, and it just sort of really blew my mind, really, just in terms of the way that he just brought his personal story in with looking at history, and looking at why, that there is such a deep trauma with Black people in this country, and just looking at how that's affected the historical sort of side of things has really affected things today. So I think it was really important just to sort of see his views on like education, is like his own sort of personal experiences of the racial biases that he experienced growing up, but also just sort of linking that into like the statistics of why it was a structural thing, and not just something that was a personal experience, but it was a deep structural bias that exists within this country. And I think it's really interesting as well because recently we've been talking about the fact that actually Tory ministers have been coming out and saying white working class boys are this is the war on woke, and like this is the reason why white working class boys have been left behind, ignoring the fact that they've been in government for the last 10 years and all that sort of stuff, but just showing how really like a lot of these biases come down to the way in which institutional racism and class sort of link in together, to really hurt people. And I think there's also a really interesting part as well. So when he talks about slavery as well, and just looking at the way in which history sort of remembers things in a certain way, and we sort of get lulled into, and I think he describes it as like the master narrative. So we talk a lot about William Wilberforce, and talk about the fact that like, and actually we do in Hull a lot, don't we? So in Hull, sorry. So we talk about William Wilberforce quite a lot, like within history, and we talk about the fact that actually, he freed people, and like that was the end of slavery. And whilst that was a really important moment, especially within Hull's history as well as like the country's history, it just ignores the fact that actually people, slaves essentially had their own revolts. And I think it shows actually that when people that are oppressed, when they fight back, and when they talk about being treated as equal, that part of history doesn't recognize like this collective strength of people. And I think he articulated it in quite a nice way, because it can be quite toxic really when you're talking about some of these really difficult sort of conversations. And I think as well, like there's like a really good bit about like where he's like talking about like Europe, and like the way in which colonialism sort of like impacts like race. And there's a bit where they talk about like the fact that race is the child of racism, not the father. So I think like sort of like our understanding of racism, like, and the fact that people are just intrinsically bad, and we just see each other as other or different, is just really, it doesn't acknowledge really like how colonialism really impacted the way in which we see a racial hierarchy within our countries, and globally as well. So I think I could go on. I'm not really sure like how much you want me to speak further on this.
I mean,
you what? Sorry.
That is a great introduction.
Okay.
You touched on what I'm going to do is just mute a couple of people to stop the echo back. and then, I mean, unmute yourselves sort of when you jump in. No, you've given a really good history of, you know, it really is it's a structural history of, well, I think a lot, you know, well, I mean, it's all in the title, why a lot of, you know, after empire's fallen away, why perhaps it's common for many people to think or to have these sort of perceptions, you know, portrayed in the media as we do. And especially Wilberforce, I think we've got quite a few people from Hull here, you know, enormous statue of Wilberforce. And one of the three myths Akala sort of points about our history is that we think Wilberforce did it alone. And I think that's a good thing you sort of touched on, you know, it wasn't his own doing. I'm going to say right from the start, I've got a few questions myself, but, you know, not enough to take up Aneesa, you know, all of Aneesa's time. I will just say that I actually thought it was quite entertaining that with the England match on this evening, you know, as they reached the final, I thought it's such a self-selecting crowd who would come to a book club about, you know, about sort of like a counter narrative that sort of goes very against, you know, sort of, you know, I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's something that tickles me about it. So thank you all for coming anyway. So any questions, just, you know, just take yourself off mute and fire away, or any other thoughts. Yeah, go on, Adam, just go for it. Oh, that wasn't a hand. No. Well, okay, I've got one then, which takes us right, because it's a history, but it sort of goes history, present, you know, this is what happened, this is how it impacts us. So it's a sort of open question then, and probably really one for Aneesa though. I mean, what next? Or what can we do? He ends the book going, I'm sort of optimistic when we work together, but I'm also very pessimistic. I mean, what next? What can we do? There's that kind of question, you know. What, you know, yeah, go for it.
I think it's a really difficult one, and I guess for me as a socialist, and like sort of reading and listening to the many stuff that the stuff that Akala said in the past, I think it's got to be about linking this to how we talk about class, because institutional racism, all of the stuff that, you know, goes on with colonialism, it is linked to a class-based politics, one that sort of, you know, tries to extract as much as it can from people. And for me, having a shared narrative, and I think it was quite evident from the book as well, having that shared narrative of being able to say, well, this is the history, this is why stuff happened, and bringing people on a collective story, because, you know, colonialism didn't just hurt, obviously it hurt, you know, people that were, you know, black or brown, or but it also hurt, like, you know, white working class people as well, like they weren't the benefactors of you know, colonialism. So I think that's the narrative that we can sort of share together, like moving forward. I think as well though, like I think it's also about having that honest conversation with ourselves. So one of the things that really frustrates me is when we talk about race in this country, there's only so far that we go in terms of like really talking about it, and then people pull back. And, you know, Martin Luther King talked about the fact that, like, the problem that we have, or the reason why we won't get further in terms of having, you know, racial equality is because of the white moderate. And that sounds quite like aggro in some ways. I think it was in one of his letters when he was in prison. But I think it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's like really good to talk about, like, you know, Black Lives Matter, put a black square on, like, and all that sort of stuff. But there has to be, you know, that further sort of conversation where it's like, well, we don't really agree with your aims, you can't do it like that sort of mentality. And I think that needs to be challenged. I think there just needs to be a bit of introspection about, well, what is it that, like, you know, that people are scared of, like, really, like, pushing the conversation further. So I don't think sorry, I'm rambling, but I don't think the problem is you know, I think there's a lot to be negative about, and I agree with him in some parts, but I think there just needs to be this shared narrative going forward, and for people not to question whether it's the right time, sort of thing.